Now I'm going to begin putting the trucks under the engine. And the trucks are something that you want to measure. And as you measure the front truck and the back truck, definitely you want to make sure that they're both evenly spaced, because both trucks, again, in a machining process, are going to be the same length. On some very, very few engines in the world have different trucks, like an FL9 has a B truck in the front and then an A1A truck in the back. But, 95 out of 100 engines, the front and back truck are, and the trucks, a good thing to remember in most cases, are a mirror image of each other. So as you kind of start, and again, a lot of the truck here, I've drawn these trucks before, but you want to look, and I'm doing you a little bit of a disservice here because trucks have been something that I have measured and measured and measured. And actually, I have an eraser on the back of my pencil, and I've found, considering that there are all kinds of art erasers and all different forms of erasing, I find having a very simple pink eraser on the back of my pencil does me a world of wonder, because when you're drawing, it's actually kind of nice that if you're in your thought process and you're just kind of drawing fairly quickly, I know artists might not totally, everybody kind of has their own, but in my thought process, I tend to, when I want to change something, I just find it best to just flip the pencil upside down and do this. And it's just been, I don't know, from day one. I started when I was, well, especially these, I started when I was 13 years old, and I just sort of found flipping a pencil over like that was what worked for me. So, and again, the more you measure, like one thing on a truck is that measuring between the front part, the middle part, and the back part, making sure that they're evenly spaced of the truck, makes it so that the wheels will all be evenly spaced. Because, again, these are all things that your eye might catch, but your eye will generally catch that if, let's say, the front wheel and the center wheel are closer together than the center wheel and the back wheel, then all of a sudden you kind of say, something's kind of going on there that's a little interesting. And the biggest emphasis of it all, I will tell you again and again, I know it's hard if you spend this much time doing this many pencil lines, but the biggest emphasis of it all is, you might find it hard to believe, but the biggest emphasis of it all is why you are doing all of these pencil lines and trying to get them all so straight is so that in the end, when you put the paint scheme on the engine, none of these lines detract from the paint scheme. You are basically trying to get this so precise that nobody even looks at it. That's your whole goal. You want almost nobody to really look at these lines because, well, they'll look at them, but the more that they stand out, in a sense, they stand out more in some ways if they're imprecise, if they're crooked in certain ways, or if they're out of place, they start to stand out. Using the 9/16 circle in this scale to do the wheel, and I even use the next size down, the 1/2, to put the bevel inside the rail wheel. You can kind of see that the rail wheel has a bevel to it. But especially, I mean, there's several places where it's really important to use circles, curves. I mean, like once again here, I'll use it like right here. This is the roller bearing. And I mean, people will always say to you like, well, you use a circle. And it's like, well, of course you do. I mean, everybody. If you have a tool, you might as well use it. But I mean, I don't recommend that you just freehand draw that circle right there. I mean, but the real bulk of what you're doing is that you're measuring. And believe me, if you can measure where a circle goes and put the circle in the right place, that's 90% of the battle. And again, when it gets to the paint scheme, there will be places where, like especially the Florida East Coast paint scheme is a great example of this. The Florida East Coast paint scheme has curves going on the front and the back, and you certainly can try to do those curves freehand, but as I keep saying, the truth of the matter is that you need to measure where they start, where they stop, and you can even take your hand and do the curve between point A and point B. The more you practice, you get really good at doing it because your hand gets steady. But there are templates that you can get that have a circle that's that big where you connect it between point A and point B. And that just tightens up your drawing quite a bit because, as I said, the biggest part of it all is measuring everything. So, trust me, if you need to use a circle in the right place, there's nothing wrong with that. And here we're measuring the second truck. And the second truck, basically, as you can see, is just a mirror image of the first truck. And I've been doing a lot of narrating as I go, and perhaps if you notice that sometimes when I do the truck, as I was emphasizing to you, trucks have taken years and years of practicing. As you notice, I myself wasn't even doing quite as much narrating as I was working on the truck. And part of why is because I'll be the first to admit, trucks actually, of all the engine, take the most concentration for me. Even after years of practicing and drawing this type of truck, trucks take a lot of concentration. They have a lot of curves, they have a lot of different start and stop points. So if trucks take a long time, I'm just going to connect these 2 points of the underframe. But if trucks take a long time for you to master, I don't even think I've mastered them at all in any way. So don't feel any one way or the other about it, because trucks, it's why I have not been talking as heavily, because they just take a lot of thought, a lot of patience. And here I'm going to hook the sand line up on this, and it even makes me realize I didn't hook the sand line up on this one. See, you actually kind of, that's a big part of drawing too, is that you realize you didn't do certain things. And I'll put the horn up here. And a big part, a huge part, considering details as small as horns, you end up, especially on older engines, but people love details such as horns. And especially through the years when train models change and that kind of stuff, you end up realizing that people will say to you things like, well, that engine's not from 1974 because the horn is in the front or the horn's in the back. And when your eye starts to spot where horns go is one of the key things. So I'm putting the fuel tank on. I'm putting the air tanks on. Now, one thing when you're practicing a lot too is that, especially in the case of the Florida East Coast engine, a lot of underframes are black. So, as much as the Florida East Coast engine is bright and bright red, and I've always considered this to be at least a lucky break, is that the underframe is basically the hardest part of the engine, I would say, but the hardest part to practice is the underframe.